Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our closing session for NITOP 2026. We're going to have our final speaker, and then after that, I'll be making some important announcements, poster award winners, before closing the conference for this year. Our final general session speaker is someone I've also been trying to get to NITOP for several years. It's Dr. Markus Brauer. Dr. Brauer is a professor of psychology and executive director at the Institute for Diversity Science, and he's a professor at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. I'm pretty sure he's the first speaker at NITOP to have earned his undergraduate degree from the René Descartes University in Paris. He earned his PhD at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Dr. Brauer is a prolific researcher. He develops and assesses interventions to change behavior across multiple domains. He has a long-standing interest in teaching. He has published books, chapters, and articles on effective and inclusive teaching practices in multiple languages. We're fortunate that Dr. Brauer has been an active participant at NITOP for the entire conference. Today, he'll address us on inclusive teaching methods, best practices to help students from all backgrounds succeed in your class. Dr. Brauer.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Can you hear me in the back? Yes, wonderful. I'm glad to be here. Just a little bit of additional information about myself. I'm a social psychologist by training. As Steve mentioned, I spent my life in 3 countries, born and raised in Germany, did my undergraduate work in France, graduate school in Boulder, Colorado, then went back to Germany as an assistant professor, then spent nearly 20 years in France as a researcher, and then joined the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2011, where I'm a professor in the psychology department, but also executive director of the Institute for Diversity Science. My research is about human behavior and how to change it. I do research in multiple domains: sustainability, civil and organizational workplace behavior, but also diversity and inclusion, both trying to understand what the causes are of human behavior, but also examining and designing interventions, how to test, how to change human behavior. My teaching, somewhat differently, is I teach basically only data analysis and statistics, and I still enjoy doing that a lot. I want to point out that nothing of what I'm going to present to you is just my own single idea. Most of my really great ideas come from my graduate students and postdocs. Here's pictures of some of them. And then my research and my work is very much influenced by my collaborator and co-leader of the Institute for Diversity Science, Dr. Angela Byers-Winston. You know that we have a problem. Students' demographics influences their likely success rate at universities and colleges. And what is interesting is that these differences, these disparities, these gaps persist even if you control for a variety of other variables: ACT scores, SAT scores, quality of prior training, motivation, you name it, it doesn't matter. So this, on the one hand, is frustrating because it sort of seems, wow, what can we do? It doesn't seem to be this. But it also is, there's hope in there in that we as instructors can maybe do something about that to reduce that achievement gap, or opportunity gap, as some people call it. Here's one line of research that I have this is the overarching question. How do we help students from marginalized groups achieve academically? And when I talk about students from marginalized groups, I think of marginalized racial groups, marginalized religious groups, women in STEM, members of the LGBTQ+ community, first-generation students, low-income students, students from rural backgrounds, students who struggle with physical and mental disabilities, sometimes also chronic mental health conditions, and finally, immigrants, people whose mother tongue is not English. And when I talk about academic achievement, you have here the list of what I'm thinking of. We usually examine course grades, so in a specific course in which we implement one of our interventions. But we also look at whether that generalizes to other things like overall GPA, 6-year graduation rates, and whether or not students switch from a STEM major to a non-STEM major. So I'm coming to you today with 4 claims, and I'm trying to, this is my take-home message and also my structure for this talk. My suggestion is we should really be using good standard teaching practices, and I explain why I think that. I think learning is essentially a social phenomenon. We therefore need, as instructors, need to think very hard about what social norms we highlight and what social norms we try to promote. Again, with the idea that learning is a social phenomenon, how incredibly important it is to create inclusive classrooms and how to do that. And finally, beyond these inclusive classrooms, teaching techniques, there are a variety of other ones that have been shown to reduce the achievement gap, and I'm going to briefly share 1 or 2 of those. So let's jump right in. So let's start with point 1, use standard good teaching practices. And these teaching practices are good for all students. They maximize student learning, but they're especially helpful for those who are struggling. And since students from marginalized groups are overrepresented in the group of students who are struggling, by definition, good teaching practices are also practices that help students from marginalized groups. So they especially help students from marginalized groups. So what am I talking about when I talk about good teaching practices? These are practices that empirical research has shown to maximize, promote student learning, student understanding, students' ability to use the learned concepts and apply them to problem-solving activities. These practices are summarized in books that I think many of you probably know quite well. Teaching Psychology, for instance, Teaching Tips. There's a recent book by Sanderson and Totten that I find quite interesting. I myself have written a book on how to maximize student learning. Here's the Spanish version of the book. Unfortunately, there's no English version. It does exist in other languages, so you can read it if it's in one of these, but sorry, it's not in English. Partly because there are already pretty good books that are out there in English. And my sons always make fun. I mean, they were raised bilingual. They always make fun of the German language. They pointed out, oh, it sounds so beautiful in other languages. Enseigner à l'université, enseñar en la universidad. But then comes German, an der Hochschule lehren. Yeah. These good teaching practices, which are described in these books, there's also progress that is being made. John Hattie, just at the annual convention last May, gave a keynote address on major findings relating to promote effective teaching practices. He is particular in the sense that he analyzes meta-analysis, so he actually reviewed 2,500 meta-analyses with 300 million students worldwide and draw a number of conclusions. I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with these. It has to do with flipped classrooms, but then the question is flipped classrooms, under certain conditions they work and under other conditions they don't. Actually, it turns out that they are particularly effective if people are exposed to the content twice. And actually then if you ask them to watch a video before and then teach that content, and the question was, is it more effective if you show the video before or if you show the video afterwards? And it turns out it's more effective if you show the video before class. Another thing is that I think it was mentioned in several sessions at this conference, the importance of retrieval practices once the material has been learned for a while. It is more effective for students to test themselves on the material rather than to further study that material. And here's the crucial aspect of low-stakes testing, giving students the opportunity to practice that retrieval by low-stakes quizzes, either in class or outside the classroom. You know that students' attention is limited and decreases during a standard lecture where the instructor talks or limits themselves to talking. The absolute minimum you can do is every 15, 20 minutes do something interesting that captures students' attention, and that can sometimes last only 30 seconds, a minute, just to get students back into attention, but there was a great session at this conference, Amédée Marchand-Matella. She has an entire research lab where she studies what works actually and what are the fine-tuned things that we should do to make lectures more effective. And her argument would be that the most effective actually is to have active learning exercises interspersed at various times during the lecture. What I'm talking about here are standard good teaching practices that I guess, given that you're coming to a conference on teaching, most of you are already familiar with. My message is simply, let's keep using them because these teaching practices will disproportionately help students from marginalized groups. Let me zoom in to claim number 2, what kind of social norms we might want to highlight in our classrooms. So my argument is that peer behavior is crucial for students' sense of belonging. We have recent climate surveys. It's work that's currently under review. When we ask students, especially students from marginalized groups, who is affecting your well-being, your sense of belonging the most? Instructors versus peers, we get 80% of the students tell us peers. When we ask students, what on this campus has to change around here? What would make a difference for you? What would improve your learning experience on this campus? We get overwhelmingly, we should change the behavior of students. And only a small minority say we should change the behaviors of instructors. So peer behavior is absolutely crucial for a sense of belonging and the success of students from marginalized groups. So how do we get students to behave more inclusively towards each other? One point that I would like to make is that the messaging that is adopted by certain instructors, by certain university administrators, even by certain university offices around bias and discrimination can actually be counterproductive rather than productive. Let me make that claim. I'm going here into the field of social psychology and social norms theory. If I want to change people's behavior, the most effective message is if I can tell them, here's a behavior, that is the right thing to do, it's a good behavior. That's what we should be doing for moral reasons or societal reasons, etc. And by the way, your peers are doing that behavior. If I can bring across that message and people actually believe me, that is the most effective way to change people's behavior. It's the right thing to do, your peers are doing it, and your peers would approve of you of doing that same behavior. And there are many domains where that kind of messaging has been adopted. Here's an example of drinking and driving, abstaining from drinking while driving, a very effective campaign in Montana. By the way, 4 out of 5 of your peers don't drink and drive. You may know the famous studies by Bob Cialdini on the towels in hotel rooms. Oh, by the way, 75% of guests in this hotel room use their towels more than once. Maybe you want to do the same thing. So in many domains, that kind of social norms messaging is used effectively, but there's one domain where we actually send very different messages. The messages that I sometimes hear is, oh, all people have implicit biases. There's widespread exclusion, the ubiquity of microaggressions, and so forth. So these kind of messages, there are 2 problems with them. Problem number 1, they're very often not supported by empirical research. They're not supported by data. In most situations, we actually do not know how many instructors, what percentage of instructors grades students from marginalized groups harsher than their non-marginalized peers. In most situations, we do not know what percentage of students use microaggressions and with what frequency they use microaggressions. Very often, we do not know what percentage of students treat a peer, a student of color, more negatively and with less kindness than they treat a white student. So very often, we have no data, and these claims are unsupported by data. The second problem with these claims is they happen to be counterproductive if my goal is to get people to behave more inclusively. So actually, this is the message that we're sending. Oh, inclusiveness is the right thing to do. But I want to point out that most of your peers are not inclusive and they're discriminating. And by the way, if you want to be a little bit more like your peers, you better start discriminating a little more. Right? That's sort of the message that we're sending along. And we know from social norms theory that if we could somehow bring across this message, that is likely going to lead to more inclusive behaviors. The question is, of course, okay, most people are inclusive. What do we do if that's actually not true or if we can't show that? But one thing we can highlight is that many of our students are committed to social justice, support the university's pro-diversity initiatives, and actually are actively asking what they can do to contribute to a climate where everybody feels welcome and where we have an inclusive campus climate. And this is exactly what we tried to do in this particular research project published in 2020. And we wanted to see, is it the case that by making salient to students that their peers value diversity, we can change students' perceptions of social norms and subsequently their behavior and get them to behave more inclusively. What we did is we did large-scale randomized controlled trials in university classrooms. We randomly assigned classrooms to experimental conditions. In this particular study, we had 3 experimental conditions. One's a control condition, no exposure, business as usual. In the bias condition, we showed students a short 5-minute video on bias and how it might play out in university settings. We did not expect that video to be effective. We wondered whether it might be counterproductive, but we definitely did not expect that video to be effective. And finally, we had our social norms video. As we called it, it was a 5-minute video. And the 5-minute video tried to bring across the idea that students value diversity and try to behave in an inclusive manner. So it consisted of a whole bunch. I don't have an except of the video. It consisted of interviews with students on campus, very short interviews. Yeah, I really care about diversity. Yeah, I'm in the multicultural learning community. I'm from a small town in Wisconsin. It was eye-opening coming here. I really enjoy the diversity on campus. It's important for me. Some people say they work in a lab. Others are members of various associations, et cetera. And then you sort of have the pictures on the right there. These are sort of senior researchers who have examined large-scale surveys and done behavioral studies on campus. And they can sort of confirm, yes, this is a campus where students are committed to social justice and support the university's pro-diversity initiatives. Many of the students, and that is true, claim, for instance, our climate service, it is very important to them that the university is committed to diversity and inclusion. And then there was a message. So we showed this video, and our hope was to change students' perceptions of diversity-related social norms. Here are the results. I'm showing you only the responses from students from marginalized groups. In the classrooms in which we showed our social norms video, and that's in dark blue, the students from marginalized group told us that their peers treated them with more respect, more positively, and with greater kindness. These same students also reported an enhanced sense of belonging compared to the other experimental conditions. These are the results from one study. We then replicated that effect in 4 additional experiments. Sometimes we showed a 5-minute video the first day of class. In other studies, we showed a poster with a large number of students, and there's sort of a message, and that, hey, most of the students we approached on campus agree with this message. So the goal is to show students on this campus are committed to diversity and inclusion and support the university's pro-diversity initiatives. Then we looked at grades, because we also wanted to see if that actually translates into better grades. In this case, these are STEM classes, and we got STEM classes with multiple sections, so we could randomize sections into experimental conditions, but then everybody would take the same exam at the end of the year. What you have in gray is the typical achievement gap or opportunity gap. You have a difference, a grade difference between marginalized students and their non-marginalized peers. But look what happens in the courses in which we showed our social norms video. That achievement gap is drastically reduced to a point where it's no longer significant. It's the effect of shaping social norms when students come in the first days of class, setting the stage, showing them this is how things are done around here, this is what we value, and by the way, this is what your peers think and what your peers do. Okay? Conclusion of claim number 2. Let's think very hard how we communicate about bias, discrimination, diversity, and inclusion. And let's think about how we can shape students' perceptions of diversity-related, inclusion-related social norms. Because once again, social norms are one of the primary drivers of human behavior. As a reminder, not attitudes, not beliefs, but social norms are one of the primary drivers of human behavior. Okay. Claim number 3, create inclusive classrooms. We started this research project with the observation that actually many methods to reduce the achievement gap put the burden on students from marginalized groups. And what do I mean by that? It sort of sounds a little bit, okay, right now, like as if a person, instructor, or researcher is talking to marginalized students from marginalized groups. Oh, right now you're making faulty attributions. Your attributions are a little bit dysfunctional. Let me teach you how to make functional attributions, how to interpret your environment differently, and then you will succeed in this college environment, which admittedly is not very supportive for people like you. But let me teach you how to function and swim upstream, how to function in this environment. And the question was, okay, this is great, and they have been shown to be effective. I'm going to show you some of these methods in a second here. But the questions that we asked, would it even be more effective if we changed the environment rather than teaching students from marginalized groups how to function in a non-supportive environment? We designed, again, a study. I think this time it was 60 college classrooms. We randomly assigned these classrooms to either the control condition, or the resilience condition, or the inclusion condition. And I'm going to explain to you in a second what that consists of. Just to sort of show you how we do that, we usually recruit instructors. Once we have a firm commitment from these instructors, we form triplets of classes. We make sure that these are classes that are similar with regard to upper level versus lower level classes, number of students in the class, is it introductory class, does it include a discussion section or not, is it STEM versus non-STEM, etc. And sometimes if we can, we even make sure that there is more or less a comparable number of students from marginalized groups in these classes. So once we have formed triplets, within each triplet, we randomly assign one class to the control condition, business as usual, one class to the resilience intervention, and one class to the inclusion intervention. So here's how that study ran out. We recruited instructors. Once we had a list, we randomized courses into experimental conditions. We had a reasonable number of courses, a total number of 2,100 students. We also had an outcome survey. Not everybody completed that outcome survey, but these are reasonable sample sizes, I would argue. Here's what we did. After we randomly assigned instructors courses to experimental conditions, we sent the instructors the intervention materials. There was a brochure that explained to them the teaching practices, and again, I'm going to show you more details in a second on that. There was also a website, which I'm also going to show you in a second. That all happened prior to the start of the semester. Then we asked these instructors, and that's what they signed up for, to implement these particular teaching practices, these particular interventions. Towards the end of the semester, we administered a student outcomes survey. We measured students' perceptions, inclusive climate, belonging, physical and mental health, persistence and motivation, a variety of other constructs. And for some of these analyses, we looked at all the students, but for other analysis, we looked at the responses from students from marginalized groups specifically. We also obtained grades from the registrar, which is always a pain to do that. But we succeeded eventually, and then after the semester, we also interviewed our instructors Especially we were interested in implementation fidelity. Did they actually do what we asked them to do? But also we wanted to see the instructors' perceptions. Did it go better for them in one of the experimental conditions than in the other conditions? Now you want to know a little bit more about what we send the instructors. Here's a brochure. It sort of folds up, and it's a very top-level summary of the teaching practices that we wanted them to implement. We also sent them to a website. So here is the website showing these intervention materials, and hey, there are 6 practices to reduce the achievement gap, and why is this important? And then there are 6 icons below that where they can learn more about the 6 teaching practices that we asked them to implement. Here's, you just see one, utility value, but let me show you what the teaching practices were in the resilience intervention. These are all, I would like to point out, very established methods to reduce the achievement gap that have been shown to be effective in empirical research. Constructive feedback is exactly what Claude Steele talked about 2 days ago, right? Low-stakes testing is retrieval practice, helping students to practice testing themselves rather than studying the material further. Self-affirmation, values affirmation, how to reduce stereotypes, classic approach. Malleability of intelligence, right? Intelligence, malleable, growth mindset, etc. The brain is like a muscle that all you have to do is train, etc. Utility value, Judy Herkevich's work on the importance of utility value and how that specifically helps students from marginalized groups. All of these are great interventions that have been shown to be effective. We definitely expected these to be effective as well. Here is the teaching practices that we asked instructors to implement in the inclusion intervention condition. How do we promote student contact among themselves? We come back to the peer relationship, the variety of methods in lecture classes and in classrooms, what you can do to promote student contact. How to promote a cooperative versus a competitive classroom. How do you structure small group work? How do you give them information? Do you randomly select the person who reports, or do you let this group decide who reports the group work to the entire classrooms? Individualizing students. I think we hear from every focus group with students from marginalized groups that students say, I'm not being seen, I'm not being heard, I feel like an anonymous person. How incredibly important it is. One instructor who just knows them by name, or who asks them, how are you doing? How is that going? Is your brother doing better? Or have you thought about going to grad school, right? Making inclusion normative, that's social norms messaging. I just showed you that in the previous study. Foster social belonging, that is Greg Walton's work on the importance of social belonging. And then we thought it would be a good idea to help correct incorrect beliefs about social groups. One of the things, I don't know if that's at your college that came as well, the white students somehow believe that the admission standards for students of color are lower at the University of Wisconsin than for white students. That's entirely incorrect. And a number of other incorrect beliefs that are common among students, and we encourage instructors to correct these incorrect beliefs. Here's what the website looked like. I'm showing you the website for self-affirmation, values affirmation. There's an explanation. So these are STEM instructors at under-resourced colleges in Wisconsin, right? So these STEM instructors, they participated in our study, which was about the achievement gap, so they're somewhat motivated to do something about it, but they're overloaded with a very high teaching load. And their motivation to do something about it is moderately high, but not incredibly high. And they're also, chemistry, physics instructors. They're not always familiar with the psychological literature or psychologically minded. So, hey, here's self-affirmation if you want to know more, and then you can click on either printable resources or the scientific evidence. So if you click on printable resources, here is ways what you can do, how you can incorporate self-affirmation into your teaching. You can do this, or you can do that, etc. Then there are a number of links. If you want to have a handout that you use in class, you can just click on the link and download it and photocopy it or whatever, or put it on the course website. And then if you scroll further down, you see again these printable resources. And here's a little video. Claude Steele also mentioned Jeff Cohen here. This is what Jeff Cohen looks like. And there's a little 5-minute video where Jeff Cohen tells about why this works and why this is incredibly important. And then you can go back and look at the scientific evidence. We thought, hey, these are STEM instructors. They like to know that this is supported by scientific evidence. So we very briefly, at a very high level, summarize the relevant science to self-affirmation. And then if you scroll further down, you see a graph of one particular study that showed the effectiveness of that self-affirmation exercise. And then there are a number of others, links to relevant scientific publications or videos. So that was what we shared with instructors with the request before the semester, 4 to 6 weeks before the semester, with the request that they please integrate these teaching practices into their learning. Let me show you the results. Here's sense of belonging. Sense of belonging relatively high on a 5-point scale in these colleges. There's a small gap in the control condition. We did not succeed in closing that gap in the inclusion condition or in the resilience condition, but actually in the resilience condition it did close. But look at the inclusion condition, it's just that everybody has an enhanced sense of belonging. So what that shows is by fostering student contact, by fostering a cooperative classroom climate, you actually increase the sense of belonging of everyone, including of students from marginalized groups. And just look at the difference for students of marginalized groups, a large increase in sense of belonging. I spare you all the other outcomes because I want to leave time for questions, and I'm just focusing on course grades here. In the control condition, again, these are STEM classes. We have the classic achievement gap. Students from marginalized groups have lower grades than their non-marginalized peers. Look what happens in the resilience condition. We succeed in closing that achievement gap. We therefore replicate research by other researchers showing that these techniques effectively reduce the achievement gap. That is what we predicted. Let me show you what happens in our inclusive classroom conditions. Not only does everybody's grades drastically improve, but the improvement is massive for students from marginalized groups. By creating an inclusive classroom and giving instructors the tools how to create inclusive relationships between students from marginalized groups and their non-marginalized peers, we help all the students, but we particularly help students from marginalized groups, and we succeed in entirely eliminating the achievement gap. These are STEM classes. Take-home mission, yes, teaching students from marginalized groups how to function in an a priori non-supportive environment is effective. We could be even more effective if we actually change the environment and get students to behave more inclusively towards each other. Once again, let me just repeat myself. The key target audience for behavioral interventions, if we want to increase the sense of belonging for students from marginalized groups, is their non-marginalized peers. That is the target audience. Okay. Fourth and last claim. Use other inclusive teaching methods, and we use this term, I don't know if it's a great term, but we use this term to describe teaching methods that have been shown to reduce the achievement gap in rigorous evaluation research, in rigorous scientific trial, and that it usually involves large-scale randomized controlled trials where classrooms or teachers are randomly assigned to experimental conditions. These teaching practices are summarized in an article that a former student of mine, Gil Moreo, and I published 2 years ago. You can read about them. There's a whole table, 20 of them, I think, et cetera, and then each of them is described the scientific evidence for their effectiveness. Let me just highlight a few of those just for the fun of it. I want to focus on individualizing students. That was one of the 6 teaching practices, how incredibly important that was. And there are many ways to make students, especially students from marginalized groups, feel individualized. But as I pointed out before, one of the ways is actually to learn their names. And I did look up the World Memory Championship, who are the current world champions. So Katie learns 105 names in 5 minutes. Emma learns 218 names in 15 minutes. There's studies that have been done on these world memory champions. These are not people with exceptional intelligence. There are people like you and me, and the only difference is that they use techniques very consistently that have been shown to lead to memorization. And these are techniques that both you and I can learn. If you want, you can invite me and I can teach a 1-hour session on how to apply any of these techniques one of these days. But these are techniques that you and I can learn, and they're a skill just like riding a bicycle or how to make a PowerPoint presentation that both you and I can learn. So I have to say, when I sometimes hear some of my colleagues say, "Oh, I'm so bad with names." No, I'm sorry, nobody is bad with names. It's just that you haven't used any of these techniques, and these techniques are available. They're YouTube videos. You can just watch them. So I sometimes hear that I feel that there are nowadays in 2026, there are no excuses for not learning students' names, and I think we should just use these techniques and learn how to master them. One other interesting aspect that I actually came as a surprise to me, and I don't know how widespread that knowledge is. Maybe you all know all this already, and I'm just repeating myself. So it turns out that exams where speed is critical for getting a good grade is actually not the best thing to do, because these exams possess what we would call low construct validity. So you understand what I mean, right? Is sort of where you have to work as a student really fast, and if you want to get a good grade working, I mean, the SAT and ACT or GRE are typical for that. So the reason that that's actually not a great thing is because timed exams have low construct validity. So when we give a timed exam, every student gets a grade, and we usually hope that that grade reflects to some extent the student's mastery of the material. However, the problem with timed exams is that they capture many other things as well. You capture to large extent stereotype threat, rumination about students, whether they're going to get it. You capture text test anxiety. And actually, if you create exams where time is a crucial element, very often you have to phrase the question in a particular way so that students can work through them fast. And once you phrase the question in a particular way, certain students are just better to pick up what is the right answer or what you want to hear. So what we are capturing is, and that's the third point here, test taking, of students' test taking ability, how well they can read the instructor and how well they can predict the instructor's ability to create these tests and what they want to hear, rather than actual students' mastery of the material. So I just wanted to point out these two. Turns out that maybe timed exams are not the best thing we can do. And sometimes we worry about people who need special accommodations and whether they need 1.5 times the amount of time or 2 times the amount of time than other students. Very often we create our exams that time is not an issue, and then we don't have any issue with these accommodation. And it turns out that we actually, the grade we get reflects to a better extent what we want to measure, which is students' mastery of the material. Let me wrap this up because I would like to open it up for questions and discussion. Actually, let me sort of conclude the first point. I only shared 2 with you, individualizing students and using timed exam, but there's actually a very big box of tools that we can use to reduce the achievement gap, that we can help that we can use to help students from marginalized groups succeed in college. And all we need to do is use these tools and apply them, and many of them are relatively easy to implement and do not require major changes of our teaching. Okay. Here are the 4 claims. I claim today that standard good teaching practices, practices that you probably have heard about for several years, help all students, but especially help students from marginalized groups. Then I hope that I contribute some new ideas, and these are the remaining 3 points. Let's think about social norms and which social norms we highlight. Everybody in social norms theory insists on the importance of transition period. Students come in, like in Wisconsin, they come from rural areas. Many of them may not have encountered many other students from marginalized ethnic groups. They come in, everything is different in college. They're away from their parents, suddenly they're surrounded by young people. They're exposed to facts or history. They're exposed to different ideas. It's a fundamental transition period for them. If at that moment we can jump in and shape their perceptions of what social norms, how things are done around here, what is valued here at this institution, what the leadership values, what the instructors values, but also what their peer value and what their peers approve of. It's a unique opportunity to get them to radically change their behavior, including to behave more inclusively. Creating inclusive classrooms, that's a project that I'm very excited about, currently under review, and I can let you know when it's published. The journal is Science Advances. Let's see if they really take it. And then the idea here is, it's great to these classic strategies to help students from marginalized groups succeed: self-affirmation, malleability of intelligence, growth mindset. All of these are wonderful, but they do put a little bit the burden on students of marginalized groups. Let's think hard about how we can create an inclusive environment. And there's a huge discussion in my field: interventions, changing the people or changing the environment. What is more effective? And we would argue that we sort of end up on the more side, changing the environment is more effective. And then there are a whole bunch of other teaching practices that we can use. When talking to you about these inclusive teaching practices, I talked to you that our definition is they have been evaluated and found to be effective in rigorous evaluation research. And I just want to give a brief end with a brief shout out to this type of research. I think there are many ideas out there. Many people sort of think they know what is due. I think if we really want to know what works and would really want to know what effectively reduces the achievement gap, what we need to do is large-scale studies with randomized controlled trials where classrooms or instructors are randomly assigned to experimental condition. And I think this is how we can make progress and ultimately help students from marginalized groups succeed in college. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. I think there are multiple microphones. Please wave to the people with the microphone, and then
Hi, so your inclusive practices for teaching, I find it really encouraging, and obviously the manipulation was really effective, but I'm wondering if you did any kind of manipulation check to make sure that the instructors were actually using the material, and if so, how?
We did, and what was a little surprising is that the instructors in the inclusive teaching condition suddenly told us that they also implemented the resilience intervention practices, even though they had never been exposed to them. And then the instructors in the resilience teaching intervention condition also told us that they did, oh yeah, I learned students' names. Yeah, of course I did that. And so it's not quite significant, 0.07, 0.08, the manipulation check. It seems that there is a trend that yes, they did implement our teaching practices. Maybe they were aware of other teaching practices. We told them you don't have to undo everything that you're currently doing. Like if somebody did values affirmation before and they were in the inclusion condition, we didn't tell them now you can't do values affirmation. We just said you do whatever you did before and you just add these teaching practices. There was a trend. It did not reach the magical level of 0.05, which I'm a little disappointed about. But it seems that they did what we asked them to do. Yes?
Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. And this is just sort of a practical question. How did you define, or what inclusion criteria did you use to designate someone as in the marginalized group?
Okay. Great question. I think we do this as a function of the groups for which there is an achievement gap. So very often the members of the LGBTQ plus community are not included in that because either we don't get the data from the register, I mean the data doesn't have any registered data on that, or then the self-reports, we have the student outcome survey where we do ask them about that, and but then not everybody responded to that. It actually turns out that we, in most of our studies in the control condition, do not observe an achievement gap for members of the LGBTQ plus community. So I think what we have to tell you, actually in Wisconsin, there's also no achievement gap for gender, so we do not include women in that. So I think what we have is African Americans, Hispanic, Native Americans, but the N's are so small that it doesn't matter whether we include them or not, and then Muslims, Arab Muslims. These are the students we included. Very often we run our analysis in multiple ways. We sort of have multiple definitions of marginalized, and we look, does it matter what definition we adopt? And the answer is it doesn't matter. With this definition, we find the difference. With that definition, we find the difference. With this data analytic technique, we find the difference, et cetera. So we find consistency across various definitions. African American, Hispanic Latinx, Native Americans, and Arab Muslims.
Steve, do we have time for another question, Steve?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great.
Yes.
Hello, yeah. Thanks for the talk. I wish we have another hour for you to keep learning. Right, and appreciate you talk about interventions and then focus on a non-marginalized group. So I'm wondering about like what about like prevention? So pushing that to a children non-marginalized group so we can prevent them what happened, and then when they go to the college, so achievement gap can be less.
Sure. I mean, I have not done research in high schools. I think many of the issues are the same, and I think some of our interventions could easily be implemented in high schools and we would find similar effects. I lack experience working with students in middle school and elementary school. They probably would have to be adapted. But I think that teaching students how to treat each other with kindness and respect and be inclusive of everybody regardless of their background will be beneficial at every level of schooling, K-12 and then college level. I do not have the data to speak to that, but I entirely agree.
Thank you. I'm going to jump into a very helpful and motivating presentation. I appreciate that. I'm wondering about your information about social norms on campuses. I'm thinking, especially I assume at Wisconsin-Madison to gather that data for the presentation that you used in the intervention. Are there data that are available that social norms are similar on all types of campuses across the country? Or, yeah.
No. My guess is that many campuses have whatever, then maybe they're no longer called climate surveys, but maybe they're called engagement surveys or engagement and motivation surveys, engagement and climate surveys, et cetera. I mean, we have data from Madison, Wisconsin, and we have data from all the colleges that are part of the University of Wisconsin system, which are sort of these under-resourced schools that primarily serve students from low-income backgrounds. And we do find consistency there in the sense that students tell us is that they do enjoy the diversity on campus. They do support the university's pro-diversity initiatives. They do say that it is important for them that the university is strongly committed to diversity and inclusion. And they say that I don't know what the behaviors are. We also ask them about their behaviors. These are self-reported behaviors. Of course, everybody presents themselves in a socially desirable manner. But they say that they try to behave in an inclusive manner so that everybody feels welcome. What we do know, because, I mean, this is Wisconsin, and I do give a lot of public talks, including in areas that majority Republican. I mean, there are a whole bunch of people, areas, institutions of all sides of the political aisle who are committed to certain ideas, right? So discrimination is bad because that's unfair. Everybody should have a fair chance if they work hard. So if there are obstacles that exist for people from certain social groups, that is discrimination and that should not exist. So very often we can get people on board, including by formulating items in a particular way where we get agreement rates of 90%. And then we highlight these norms, these agreement rates. Oh, 90% of the students, and we're not lying. Because I do want to point out Bob Cialdini with his towels. He didn't have any data to say that 75% of the people hung up their towel and the thing. Well, we don't do that, I want to point out. We actually do collect the data, and we do collect data from representative samples of the student. We try to make it representative, and we do report actual data. So I don't know, but I mean, if you want an advice, I mean, certain items, you can formulate them in a way where most people will agree. Yeah.
Check, check. Picking up on a social norm that I'm supposed to stand when I ask my question, but I'm going to violate that norm because you can see me and you know
how quick it goes.
Fabulous talk, so interesting. I'm wondering if you have any predictions about longer term outcomes from these interventions, because I know one of the really cool things about some of Jeff Cohen and Greg Walton's work is that they've found, 10 years later, sometimes students who've had these interventions that certainly do put the burden more on the student are also showing better outcomes once they leave a particular environment and are now in a different environment. So do you have any thoughts about what long-term consequences could be for these students, whether there could also be some benefits of these environmental interventions further down the road?
Yes. We do have one paper came out. I got the page proofs, not the page proofs, the final publication literally yesterday, 2026 Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin. And what we did is a slightly different intervention. We added a page to a syllabus. And the page consisted of 4 things. First of all, there was leadership endorsement. It was made very clear that the campus leadership was strongly committed to diversity and inclusion. And there were quotes from the campus leader, the chancellor, and the provost for teaching, whatever. Then we communicated social norms. Here's what your peers think, like before. We highlighted some benefits of behaving inclusively, because that's also something that is interesting in the diversity inclusion domain. It's usually always formulated negatively, and discrimination and bias is bad, and you do this, and the finger, and you're bad, and don't be bad, and everything is bad. So we'll talk about the positive things. One, here's what you might get out of behaving inclusively. Here are the benefits that you might experience by behaving inclusively. And then we gave concrete behavioral advice of what actually it means to behave inclusively, because our focus group students told us, what do you mean? We do these student orientations and we have bias training workshop, and then the facilitator sends us away and says, hey, go out and be less biased. Well, what does that mean? Just tell me what I'm supposed to do. I want to contribute to a positive, inclusive campus climate. Just tell me what I'm supposed to do. So we gave them concrete behavioral advice of what behaviors to avoid and what behaviors to do. This was a syllabus, a page that instructors added to their syllabus and then went over the first day of class for a minute or two. In this particular study, we did find long-term effects for students, including their GPA and including, I think, their graduation rate. And especially the effects were particularly strong for incoming students. We did not see a lot of change for the third and fourth year students. For them, it was already all settled. They knew the social norms. They knew what was going on this campus. But whopping effects for students from first and second year students. And here we do find that their overall GPA 4 years later is higher in the treatment condition where they were exposed to the syllabus page, the inclusion page in the syllabus, rather than in the control condition. So there are certain studies where we do find, again, the registrar is incredibly resistant unless you put it in your consent form, oh, we want overall GPA 3 years later, the registrar will not give us the data. But in this study, we did find that.
Let's thank Dr. Brauer one more time, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, hear me? So now, my friends, it is time to return to our home institutions and to the recommended daily intake of 2,000 calories. I hope you return home with a fortified spirit and new ideas for teaching. But before we disperse, however, we have several items of business to complete. First of all, we have our poster awards. Our poster awards, there are 3 different poster awards. Each winner receives a certificate and a complimentary registration at a future NITOP conference. The award-winning posters were chosen by a committee made up of members of the organizing committee. The first award is the Frank Costin Memorial Award for Excellence. This award honors Frank Costin, the first director of NITOP. This award is funded by the generosity of Doug and Doris Bernstein, who normally attend, but they were not able to come this year. This award is given to the poster judged as best promoting quality teaching methods. And the recipient this year is poster 19, Joyce Lacey, University of Buffalo, SUNY, Student versus Instructor Opinions of End of the Semester Course Evaluations. Is Joyce here? So we will get that to her. Second award is the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Award for poster judged to be most outstanding in terms of A, the importance of the research question addressed, B, the soundness of the research methodology employed, C, the use of appropriate qualitative and/or statistical analyses, and D, the clarity with which the implications of the research findings for teaching and learning are expressed. Our recipient this conference is poster number 6, Helena Maudsley, University of Florida, Impact of Service Learning on Motivation, Engagement, and Purpose in Human Development Students. And I know that Helen's already departed the conference. Our final award is the Doug Bernstein Award. Doug was the longest serving director of NITOP. It is for the poster judge to be most humorous, creative, or original, or as making the strongest contribution to the teaching of introductory psychology. Our recipient for this award is poster number 24, Courtney Stevens from Willamette University, Improving Critical Thinking in Intro Psych, a freely available research-validated curriculum. There's Courtney here, also left. Okay. All right, before we close the conference, I have to thank the people who make this conference possible. So first, I have to thank our amazing NITOP organizing committee. I'll ask them to stand one more time and take a bow. Also, I want to thank our volunteers who have been helping throughout the conference: Beverly Barrett, Carrie Bond, Alyssa Beyer, Josh Lovett, and Lisa Mapes. Some of them are here. You can stand up. And please thank the person most directly responsible for what you've experienced during this conference, our amazing conference coordinator, Annette Cook. Thank you to our partners and sponsors of the generous support, the Association for Psychological Science, the Sage Publishing, W.W. Norton Company, APA, the Society for the Teaching of Psychology, Council of Undergraduate Research, the Psychonomic Society, Flat World Publishing, Macmillan Learning, Sue France, the Mobile Tourism Association, and of course, we thank our individual donors. We thank our exhibitors for choosing to display their products at our conference, and of course, we thank each of you for investing your time and funds to come to NITOP. I want just a couple of final announcements. The HUVA program will be available for 3 months after the conference. You'll be receiving a link in your email, which will make it easier to download the materials you like directly to your computers. So I want to ask those of you who are your first year of NITOP to please raise your hands. Those of you who are here. By the power of the NITOP torch, I now declare you NITOP veterans. Congratulations, and I hope you will find a home at NITOP in future years, and you will come here for many years to come. So please, you've received the link for evaluations. We're always looking for ways to improve the conference. At the end of this session, the conference committee will drag ourselves across the hall, and we'll begin to plan NITOP 2026. If you know, or NITOP 2027, if you know people who would be good speakers at a future NITOP, please be sure to mention them. Next year, we invite you to convene for NITOP 2027, and on January 3rd through 6th, we are negotiating with the Grand Resort to return next year. So we'll be there. Now, you can help us. We're going to be working on some marketing strategies in the coming year, and we hope to use some of your quotes and comments from the evaluations in that endeavor. If NITOP has been a beneficial experience for you, help us get the word out about our conference and our new location. So please, I encourage you to spread the word among your colleagues, post some of your experiences on your social media, recommend us to your friends and to your colleagues. NITOP is a place that teachers of psychology belong. On behalf of the organizing committee, we hope you found these last 4 days to be both inspiring and relaxing. We hope you've made new friends and new connections and head home with new ideas and activities. And now, to mark the close of NITOP, I extinguish the NITOP torch. We spare no expense on special effects. Okay. So, to be rekindled on January 3rd, 2027, we hope to see you there. In the meantime, safe travels, everyone, and have a great semester.
And before you leave, please an extra special thank you to Steve Chu, who does almost everything.